Christina Previtt here with the PT on Ice Older Adult Edition. I hope you guys all had a wonderful, wonderful holiday and a happy Boxing Day. I realized as the only Canadian on faculty that Boxing Day isn't really a thing in the US, and it is a huge shopping day in Canada. So I'm really, really excited. Our older adult course starts on the 8th of January. So we are frantically trying to get the last little bits done. And so Dustin and I have kind of been giving out teasers to the older adult course over the last couple of episodes. And I thought I would continue that trend today. And we're on the virtual ICE platform tomorrow, talking a lot around exercise prescription with older adults. So I'm really excited. Okay, so today I thought that I would talk about the hip hinge, aka the deadlift or the rack pull. I talked a little bit about when this may or may not be indicated for people with low to very low bone mineral density in a previous episode, talking about the Lift More clinical exercise trial. But today I'm going to kind of switch from the research side and flip over to some of the clinical side and talk a little bit about how I use this in practice and when I would use it, when I wouldn't, some of the cautions and precautions that I use, and some of the parameters that I'm looking for when I'm teaching the hip hinge. The reason why I think this exercise is so important, and you're going to know why I am holding on to this dowel if you're wondering, watching live in a second, is that this is essentially how we teach getting something up and off the floor. A lot of my older clients in particular who have a fear of falling don't like picking something up off the floor because it feels like it shifts their center of mass and it threatens their balance. And they're afraid that when they reach forward, they're just going to keep going and they're going to end up on the floor. And that's not something that we want. So we want to try first to make sure that people are picking things up in a safe way so that they're not increasing the risk of injury, particularly low back injury, that they are feeling confident with being able to pick things up off the floor, because that's one of the things that they need to be able to do day to day in order to take care of themselves and make sure that they are able to stay in their home independently. And it's a great way of strengthening the muscles in the posterior chain, especially when you're doing it in a safe way. Okay. So when we're teaching teaching any client, not an older adult, teaching anyone to do a hip hinge, I'm going to try and do a demonstration here. I like using the dowel analogy where we are taking the dowel, placing it behind, and telling people that when we are doing a hip hinge, we want to maintain contact with our head, our shoulder blades, and our low back as we're picking something up. So if the dowel is here, I am hinging at the hip. I also like to use the example of a dodo bird going into the water, except the more that I've been using that, the more I realize that people don't know what those birds are that go into the water anymore. And so I may be a little out of date with my analogies. Okay, so I use the dowel as a good example. So we're saying that our pivot point is largely coming from the hip. We are not creating a lot of shearing forces through our low back. It's staying rigid, and our low back is used for stability rather than a primary mover. But what happens when we're with an older client who may not have that alignment? It may be because of short hamstrings. They may be seeing a postural posterior pelvic tilt. We're seeing increased mechanical thoracic kyphosis that may not be something that we can correct for. All of these things come into play because we have prolonged posturing throughout our life, and that shows a little bit more exaggerated with our older clients. And so for some of my older clients, I'm looking more at optimal rather than perfect. And here's what I mean by that. If somebody has a mechanical thoracic kyphosis that isn't something that is orthopedic in nature or pain inhibiting, then it may not be something that I can realistically think that I am going to correct with some of my interventions. It's not saying that it's something that we can't work on improving and we can't do postural re-education, but it may be something that I'm not thinking that I'm going to get them into a perfect thoracic curve before I start to load them. And so if I am seeing that they are in a optimal alignment for them and they are not doing anything that is unsafe, I will still start to apply load in a very safe way, and I'm watching for any shifts in their biomechanics, but trying to wait until they get to that point is unrealistic, and it's probably not doing them as much good as it could, because we need to strengthen in the range that they have, because that's what they're doing in their day-to-day. So say, for example, we're going to stay with this thoracic kyphosis. There isn't any severe bone mineral density, which, as we've seen in the Liftmore study, we can start to do a rack pull, but we would probably do it a little bit more conservatively in nature, and we would be a lot slower with our progressions. Then I start reinforcing this hip hinge pattern, often with no weight, using a dowel, or using some sort of like a broomstick or something, depending on what you have in your setting, if you're in home health versus you're in a clinic. And we start to reinforce this pattern, like thinking about hinging from the hip, really watching the position of the spine, seeing that it doesn't change from their starting point. What I mean by that is if we have increased thoracic kyphosis, I'm going to try and do this, but I'm seeing that they are locked in their low back. That is the important part. I'm seeing that there is no shift, so that the movement isn't happening through the segments of the spine. It's actually happening through the hip and the activation of the muscles in the posterior chain. Okay, so we teach the hip hinge pattern. They're doing pretty good. Now what do we do? Oftentimes, especially with a lot of my older clients, I don't start by picking something up off the floor. I either start from a height, which in the athletic populations is a rack pull. So I'm starting by setting the position of the rack, or by I use plastic parallettes at different heights. I start at the high height and make sure that they can maintain their movement mechanic through that range, and then the progression over time is lowering the height of the rack until I'm getting to a point where their biomechanics break down. I also find something really helpful with some of my older clients, and this is completely anecdotal and from a clinical perspective, is that oftentimes a top-down approach is easier at the beginning with some of my older clients than doing a bottom-up approach. For some reason, having them start at the hip and saying, stick your bum back and keep that spinal alignment is a lot easier. I also see if I start from the top down, their first rep, I'm often creating a lot of cues for them to maintain biomechanics. But as soon as they go from the top down to the second rep or the third rep, I'm seeing a lot more improvement in their movements. So there can be, and people are different. So for some people, I will always start with a top-down approach and make sure that they're keeping their movement mechanics going down and going back up. For others, they have a good body awareness and position sense, and I can get them starting from the bottom down. So when do we stop? Where do we stop from the height perspective? For some of my older clients, I will never get them pulling directly from the floor from a strengthening perspective. The reason why is because there's something else orthopedically that's going to impede their biomechanics, and then the cost-benefit ratio just isn't worth it. What I mean by that, for example, if people are in a really severe posterior pelvic tilt and hamstring length is an issue, that as soon as they try and pull from the bottom position, I work in a gym, so I have those big bumper plates, so I'm still about, I would say, 8 inches off the floor. They're not in a good position, and then the first, 6 inches to a foot off the floor is them trying to reestablish their lumbar alignment, because they inevitably butt wink or curve their butt under even more, and so they're reestablishing lumbar alignment, and then you're seeing the chest rise with that posterior chain pattern a little bit more smoothly. If that's the case, then I'm just not going to strengthen them from that perspective. I'm just not going to work on strengthening in the range that's going to put them into an unsafe position. So the way that we can progress from a exercise prescription perspective is obviously lowering the height of the parallettes or the racks that we're using, getting them closer and closer to the floor while maintaining their good alignment. The second way is obviously we can start adding load. I like to ask about some of my clients, their day-to-day tasks, and see what they're doing. So if they're doing things like heavier manual therapy, if they're living potentially in a more rural setting where they have, say, a wood fire and they have to do a lot of lifting of wooden, do a lot of like transferring of wood back and forth to the house, they're actually lifting quite a bit. And therefore my goal will be about adding strength from a weight perspective, because they have to be strong enough to handle what they're asking their body to do. Often the analogy I use, because some of my older clients can say, well, why am I lifting 40 pounds? I'm never lifting that around the house. And the thing that I say is, say if you're doing laundry and the laundry basket weighs 20 pounds and the max that you can lift is 25 pounds, then you're doing an 80% effort every single time that you are doing your household chores. And biomechanics matter a lot more at a higher percentage of your 1 rep max than they do at a lower percentage of your 1 rep max. And so if you can lift 60 pounds, then now that 20 pounds becomes a much lower percentage of your 1 rep max, and it's too early for me to be doing that, 33%. And then it doesn't matter so much. You increase your resiliency, you increase your functional reserve, injury risk goes down, continued injury risk, and you're less likely to have pain with those movements. And so it really does depend on the individual. I'm also trying to make sure that I'm getting buy-in from my clients. And so if they are super opposed to adding weight, sometimes that's an education perspective where they think they're going to hurt their back by learning that hip hinge pattern. And it may be just working through mental barriers with them. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and I'm switching tactics. And it's also about making sure that people understand that their body essentially needs to be strong enough to handle what they're asking them to do. And with age, naturally over time, our muscle mass and our muscle strength and our muscle power begins to go down. We see that we're seeing about a 1% decline in muscle strength each year after the age of about 50, and that accelerates after the age of 70. So if people are saying, well, I never had an issue with strength before, they may just be in a time in their life where these natural occurring decrements in strength are affecting their ability to do tasks that before were a lot easier for them to do. And the way that we mitigate that, because some of it is natural and we're not going to be able to stop that loss of strength from happening completely, but strength training, and especially doing strength training movements that are going to transfer into daily tasks, is going to be really important. And it's something that we as physical therapists and rehab professionals and fitness professionals have a huge role to play in helping some of our older clients stay in their homes and do the things that they want to do. And in the spirit of the 45 centimeters of snow we got in Canada this weekend that got me stuck in my driveway this morning, that hip hinge pattern is huge, because if people are in their homes and they have to shovel their driveways, then they're essentially doing that hip hinge pattern over and over and over again. And inevitably, when that happens, as a physiotherapist, I get somebody with back pain coming into my clinic because they had to shovel a lot of snow and their body didn't have the strength to be able to repetitively carry those snow shovels. And so I thought that this talk about the hip hinge was kind of timely in regards to the huge snowfall that I have in my front yard. Okay, so that is it for today. If you guys have any other questions about the hip hinge, comment below. Try and tag me to Christina Prevett so that I can see it. There's a lot that happens on the ICE page that sometimes I don't see everything. So if you want to tag me, that would be awesome. If you guys have any other questions about the ICE course, you should definitely ask Dustin or myself, because it is going to be awesome. And I'm really, really excited to get started. So it's January 8th. So that is so close. I will not be on the podcast again until 2018, so have a wonderful end of 2017. All of the best, and I hope that 2018 gives you everything that you want. Bye, guys.